Welcome back to the fifth episode of People in Policy, where we talk about political events and policies. This one's more of a policy-based thing, and how they affect you. And I know I said we again. Ari's not here. It's just me this time, and you may be wondering, why did Ari abandon you? That's a good question. I'm wondering that too. Ari. No, I'm just kidding. She was not here last week, which is why we couldn't film at all last week. And then this week we filmed in the beginning of the week. And it was all good. It was a great episode, but her mic was off. I don't blame her for that at all. It happens. But anyway, we couldn't hear it all. And so now I have to film this again very last minute. But anyway, talking about this week's topic, it's basically the United States sending weapons to Ukraine. Probably more of a positive topic, which is something we haven't really had, so I'm really happy to see that. And Ari was too. I wish he was here. Anyway, if you haven't seen the news, that's the United States sending weapons to Ukraine has been a pretty big topic in that. Maybe you don't watch the news, and that's okay. That's why you're listening to us. Or to me. Man. Anyway, that's the topic for today. Let's get into it. So the first question is, what were the views and actions regarding the conflict on all sides that led up to this decision? Well, first of all, once upon a time, the Russia-Ukraine war, it started a long time ago. It started in like 2014. But the original invasion started in February 24, 2022, which is basically where our story starts. And Ukrainian president at that time, Volodymyr Zelensky, declared martial law in Ukraine, which means you're leaving kind of everything up to the military, and broke diplomatic ties with Russia, obviously. Basically, the United States started getting involved at around that time, or like right after that, and started sending military aid under the Biden administration over to Ukraine. Under this attack, Putin of Russia, he had his goals for restricting certain powers in Ukraine, especially NATO. So if you don't know, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is basically a military alliance between certain European countries and certain North American countries. And they basically say, like, oh, I'll protect you in any circumstances. I'll protect you if you are feeling or if you are threatened by any other country. So they send all kinds of military aid, and it's like a complete guarantee. And the United States is part of NATO, but Ukraine isn't part of NATO. And it's because of Russia, because Russia is saying, and Putin is saying, like, you can't do that. Like, that's a big threat to us. Basically, NATO protects Ukraine a little bit, right? NATO is sending a good amount of military aid over to them, but it's not like a guarantee. So NATO could stop at any time, unlike any other country who's actually a member. And NATO has agreed that they let Ukraine in. It's just that Ukraine can't do that because they don't know what reaction they're going to get from Russia. So Russia views them joining NATO as like a huge threat to the country. They think it goes against Cold War promises that were made. And really they think that, or at least Putin believes that Ukraine is just part of Russia. They believe that they're supposed to work together at all times. And NATO, since Russia's not a member of NATO, if Ukraine were to be a member of NATO, that'd just be like out of place, I guess. And just overall threatening. Putin believes that Western influence on Ukraine is going to cause anti-Russian feeling. I don't think that's the reason why anti-Russian feeling is going on in Ukraine, buddy. If you're launching invasions, that's the reason they're anti-Russian. Please don't send this to him. Anyway, so another thing, Putin has called for neutrality and demilitarization in Ukraine. So basically, since he views Ukraine as like a smaller nation and kind of part of Russia, but he wants Ukraine to have fewer weapons and a smaller military and things like that. The reason why, I don't know, probably for Russia to gain more power over Ukraine, because when Ukraine can't fight, who are they going to rely on? Probably Russia, unless it's NATO, which in this case, it kind of is. And lastly, he's called for the regaining of Russian historical lands from Ukraine, basically places like Novorossiya and things like that. And he's already gained, after the invasion, I think in 2024, because the invasion started in 2022. So after the invasion in 2024, the Russian military had occupied a good amount of land in Ukraine, so much so that they just annexed that land and made it part of Russia. But he's kind of greedy. He kind of wants more. So he's going off like going after certain historical lands. I don't know if they would be considered historical lands, but they are part of Ukraine. Russia wants them back. The day of the invasion, 7,000 U.S. military personnel were deployed across Europe, and from there, the Biden administration approved providing Ukraine with military assistance. So from that point on, we just kept providing them with military assistance. And we sent our troops over, we sent our weapons over. And when President Trump came into office, starting with his first campaign, he kind of praised Putin, called him a quote genius, according to a New York Times article from July 14, 2025, and hoped that they would form kind of a good relationship. He counted on Putin to be, I guess, a mediator, to be a peacekeeper, and thought that he was having peace talks with Ukraine for like goals of a ceasefire and stuff like that. And according to Euronews, on June 7th, Putin came out to say that Russia had plans of peace talks with Ukraine and a potential ceasefire. However, like the Kremlin, the Russian government, the Kremlin is basically like the White House, but in Russia, if you don't know what that is. So anyway, the Kremlin, they said no, right? They don't want a ceasefire, but Putin said he'd continue on the agenda, and that was the promise that he'd made, at least to Trump. On July 4th, the White House said that President Trump had paused the delivery of some forms of military defense and weaponry going to Ukraine. So, after Putin had made those promises, Trump was like, okay, so we're not going to send weapons to Ukraine anymore because, one, they don't need it if you're going to make a ceasefire, and two, it had come to his attention by the Pentagon that we were losing some of our weapons. Like the United States couldn't make up for all the weapons that we were sending to Ukraine. So he's like, okay, this has to stop. And it's okay because the war will be over soon. Well, he was wrong. He found out that Putin wasn't really super serious about that and kind of procrastinating on the matter, wasn't having those peace talks, wasn't negotiating with Ukraine. And then he called for the continuation of weapons to be sent to Ukraine. So he was like, okay, you know what? I'm really mad. I think he came out with some tweets about that. Ari had something really good about that when she was here, but anyway, he basically just started sending a few weapons over to Ukraine, a little threatening, but he was like, he had all these words to say about Putin. And yeah, Putin was like completely unfazed. And they had a phone call, and Trump realized maybe he wasn't going to stay true to his word. And that was kind of what led up to the decision that we've come to now. So the next question is, what has been planned up to this point? So basically, this whole plan and what we're talking about is that President Trump has negotiated a deal with NATO, and it said that the United States would send Patriot defense missiles to NATO members, and from there, they would be sent to Ukraine for their defense. So basically, the United States isn't sending stuff directly to Ukraine. They're sending it to NATO, and not only are they just sending it over, but NATO is paying for it. So NATO is buying weapons from the United States to send to Ukraine. It's basically like a cheat code. Like, honestly, pretty good idea. I'm not even gonna lie. Yeah, so they're intended to be fully paid by NATO, leaving no burdens for the United States. And I mean, except for having to keep building them, but that's no problem. We were going to do that anyway. Along with this deal, the more threatening matter is that Trump has threatened Russia with severe tariffs of up to 100%. Now, not directly on Russia, but these tariffs would be secondary. So they'd go to any countries that import from Russia. So I think China and India import from Russia. So if they buy anything from Russia, he's going to put tariffs on India and China so that we stop buying from them. And then they're going to be like, oh my gosh, now we need to stop buying from Russia because of these tariffs. And then Russia would lose all of its trading partners. So that's kind of the strat, I guess. But yeah, it would cut off economic ties between Russia and other countries. And that is going to be kind of the big thing. So there are positive and negative things that come with this. And I think there's a threat, and then there's like something really good for Ukraine. So we're kind of going against Russia here, which is something that we have not really done. President Trump has been kind of pro like ending the war in between Ukraine and Russia and not really taking sides, kind of being somewhat neutral, but definitely praising Putin a little more, but definitely somewhat neutral and overall hoping for the ending of that war. And now he's showing, you know what, I'm going to put a little more effort into this and not technically send weapons to Ukraine, which he's kind of like cheating the system there. Not in a bad way. I think it's actually a very smart idea what they did. But sending weapons over to NATO so they can send them to Ukraine and kind of adding on to that war a little bit, which is kind of a little different. Definitely some different perspectives than what have been seen in the past over this war by the president and by the United States and by kind of everyone. But these are definitely like interesting perspectives to see. I will say. So, how will this impact the countries as a whole? Is the next question. Basically, Russia, they have to make some quick decisions, right? They're probably going to be a little mad about this. It's a little tense because they're facing both an armed Ukraine, which means the fight is still going to go on, and Ukraine is still going to be armed with pretty good weapons from the US, and also a drained trading economy because if these tariffs actually go on, he basically gave them 50 days to change. So, by the way, I didn't say that before, but he gave Putin 50 days to change what Russia's doing and to have some talks with Ukraine. And if they don't do that, they're going to be tariffs. And they're going to be big and they're going to be bad, whatever. So anyway, 50 days, they have to do that pretty quick. They have to make that decision pretty quick. Is he going to have a ceasefire? Is he going to keep fighting the war? That's something we're going to find out. But if Ukraine maintains a stronger military, it's going to mean a standoff. And this war is definitely going to keep going on. And I don't think it's necessarily going to end anytime soon. It's been going on for a very long time. But there is that possibility of a ceasefire. There's also the possibility of maybe even escalation of the war. Or Russia could, and if they do escalate, Russia's losing its trading partners. It may have a big effect, it may not on Russia. You just have to see what happens. But Russia does have an okay economy. So, yeah, and then looking at Ukraine will probably see the positive outcomes of this, which is pretty cool. During the halt on the weapon supply from the US, there were definitely struggles. And hopefully with fast, efficient, strong weaponry, Ukraine can continue that fight. So even though it's far from over, it's a big step for them. And that's nice to see. But they could see the negative effects with Russia because they don't know what these reactions are going to be from Russia. And Russia could definitely escalate this war, and they have the power to do that. And that could be something that Ukraine might see, and Ukrainian citizens and civilians could see. That's definitely a possibility. So there are positive and negatives, like I said, especially for the people of Ukraine. They're definitely going to see the biggest effects of this. I'd say Russia and Ukraine are definitely going to see the most. And the United States, we've got some good things going on because the only thing we face is like diplomatic ties might be a little ruined, and we're definitely now leaning more on the Ukraine side than on the Russia side, which is different than how we have been. And that's a big change. So that's going to change our diplomatic ties, and Russia is definitely going to dislike us, likely. So we're going to drift from that nation with all these tariffs and whatever. And then aside from that, there's nothing to really worry about regarding the weapons. Your taxes aren't going to go up to pay for these defense missiles that we're sending to Ukraine. Don't worry. It's just going to be kind of helpful for us, I'd say, because it changes our relations, especially with NATO too. And, NATO countries already kind of dislike us for valid reasons. We're having a good few problems, as we talked about in the last episodes. Every single thing has been somewhat problematic. But this is helpful for our ties with NATO countries because we're giving weapons to them, and not as generous as it could be because we could just be giving them for free. But at the same time, the U.S. has got to keep its economy up and can't just be giving away weapons all the time. So, we're not going to have to pay for that. You taxpayers out there, not going to have to pay for it. Don't worry, because these weapons are fully paid for. So, yeah. Anyway, I think this is a pretty smart thing, is what me and Ari were talking about before, is that this is like a smart thing on the United States part, and the plan that we've made is pretty smart. One, because it's helpful for like us. We're not just sending our weapons away, which was something that was a big concern among, I'd say, maybe Republicans and also just the Pentagon in general. It was that we're sending too much of our weaponry over to other countries that we're losing it all. And that's not helpful for our military. So now we have the money that we're getting, so we're just selling it instead of just sending it. And it means we can keep making the weapons. We still have the money for it. So that's really nice. It's nice that it's paid for. And another thing is just how like smart of a decision this was, because And this is definitely more of an opinionated thing. I just think it was pretty well thought out. Because though it does change things a lot, it's like we're not necessarily sending things over to Ukraine, so we're not getting as involved in this war as you might think we are. And it's definitely, I mean, obviously that was our intention, was to get things over to Ukraine, and that's what we're doing. But we're selling it to NATO. So, NATO could have done whatever they wanted with it. We just told them, give it to Ukraine. That's that was the point of us sending the weapons over, but like it's not like we're just giving them away for them to go straight to Ukraine. It's very strategic. So I think it's pretty different to see. And it could mean, less than an excuse for Russia to be super mad at us, because it's like, well, we just sent it over to NATO. They could have done whatever they wanted with the weapons. Like, don't blame me. Don't shoot the messenger here. Like, you know. So yeah, I think it was a pretty well thought out plan. So looking at who this will impact and how, this mostly impacts people of Ukraine and Russia. Obviously, like I said before, Ukrainians are going to see that struggle to continue with a stronger military on their part, which is somewhat beneficial, but the fight's probably going to keep going on unless Russia comes to that ceasefire. And there could be complications if Russia just escalates the conflict, because now they're threatened with tariffs, they're threatened with an armed Ukraine. That's going to be kind of a problem for them, and they're not going to be happy, I'm expecting. So those Ukraine may see those negative effects surrounding that. And the fight's going to go on unless a ceasefire is agreed upon by Russia. So we're definitely waiting to see the results of that. If Russia agrees on a ceasefire, that would be great. That would be a big, big change from things that we've seen for years. And that would be great to see. But so far, that's what the plan is. So thank you so much for watching or listening. We hope this gave you a little bit of clarity. Or I always say we because normally I'm here with Ari. Anyway, I hope this gave you a little bit of clarity, and I really hope you enjoyed watching or listening. See you in the next episode, hopefully. Bye.